Hey guys, it's Catherine Morgan here and welcome to my YouTube channel. Now this channel is here to bring you short but powerful videos to help you to navigate both the emotional side of money, our relationship with money, and the practical steps to help you to reduce financial anxiety and become more financially empowered to deserve wealth, grow wealth, and create wealth. My name's Catherine and I'm a qualified financial planner and international multi-award winning financial coach. That's a bit of a mouthful. So welcome to my channel. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button and do leave me a comment below and let me know what was your biggest takeaway from listening to this video. Speak to you soon. Hi guys, and welcome to the In Her Financial Shoes podcast. Now today we're going to be talking about recovering from the lockdown. And this is a really super important subject. And I know that many of you would have experienced some pretty significant changes in your life during COVID and also as we kind of continue through these ups and downs that we're all experiencing right now. And we had lots of really great conversations about this in the Facebook community. We talked about what happens when you lose an income. We've talked about redundancy in there. We've talked about furlough schemes, all sorts of different things. And we've also talked about some of the positive results of lockdown as well in terms of finances. Now, this actually happened to us during lockdown. I'm not sure if I've actually shared this on the podcast yet, but my husband actually had to take a fairly significant pay drop for 3 months during lockdown. And so we ourselves had to kind of go back to reviewing our spending plan and our financial situation. And we had to look at things like insurances. We had to drop down his income protection insurance, which we're now actually struggling to get back up again for reasons which I won't bore you with on the podcast. But we had to go through, a couple of different changes ourselves with our finances. And there are some real challenges out there at the moment. And I just want to share some kind of statistics around some of the problems that some of you may be facing at the moment, just to kind of put a bit of a reality check on some of these things. So according to UK Finance, which is the body that represents the banks and the finance industry, loan providers have already reached over 700,000 payment holiday requests on personal loans. Mortgage lenders as well have already hit sort of 2 million payment holidays. And some of you may have actually taken some decisions to take a mortgage payment holiday. And the FCA have announced an extension to that scheme until the end of October 2020. So many people are still applying even now or looking at, whether they should continue to extend their mortgage payment holiday. And we've talked about that on the podcast before. The UK Finance have also said that 1 million people are getting payment holidays on their credit card bills. So lots of kind of really significant stats in there to show what the government are doing to support and the FCA are doing to support people in debt. So for those of you who have made decisions to take payment holidays, will at some point have to make the decision then as to when do you start repaying those back again. And the interest on those loans will still be accruing even when you're on a payment holiday. Now, Step Change, who is the debt charity that we often talk about on the podcast, they estimate that people in the UK will accumulate an additional 6 billion in debt because of the pandemic. And Step Change said that on average, people will rack up an additional £1,076 of arrears and £997 worth of debts. Now, I don't often share statistics on the podcast, largely because I don't want this for you to listen to this and feel fear, because debt is one of those words, isn't it, that a lot of people think that debt is negative. But actually, in this situation, I think that what the FCA and the government have put together in terms of supporting people is very positive. So we shouldn't see this as a negative just because we're using words like debt. But because of the current situation that we're faced in, I thought we would do an episode today to talk about some really practical aspects of how we go about managing and dealing with some of these challenges. So to help answer some of those questions, I've actually invited Paul Went from Shawbrook Bank, who is the Managing Director of the bank's consumer division. So thank you so much, Paul, for coming onto the podcast today. How are you doing?
You're welcome, Catherine. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're so welcome. Paul and I had a call last week in preparation for our podcast today because we're really supportive of Shawbrook Bank. And actually, Shawbrook have decided to sponsor our podcast for the next 12 weeks. So you'll be hearing us talk a little bit more about Shawbrook. And as you know, on the podcast, we only support brands and companies that we're really supportive of. And there's a link between our mission and theirs as well. And we're going to talk a little bit more about Shawbrook's mission later. But Paul, in terms of your experience, one of the things we love to get talking about on this podcast is actually not just the practical steps, but also some of the kind of emotional aspects of money and how our relationship with money does have an impact on the decisions that we then make, whether that's, extending payment holidays and those kind of things. So I would really just to get to know you a little bit better, Paul. So tell us a little bit about yourself. And first of all, tell us a little bit about how did you get into finance in the first place?
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. And actually, I think we'll probably come back to it a bit later. Hearing some of those numbers of people that have been affected by the payment holidays and the mortgage holidays is quite stark, isn't it? Seeing those numbers in black and white. And I think if we've all got used to sitting in front of our TVs at 5 o'clock every day and seeing the Prime Minister or Whitty tell us how many people have been infected, or sadly how many people have died. And I think there's this other set of numbers actually that aren't in the conversation, which is how many people are being directly affected by COVID. From a can I pay my bills? Can I pay my mortgage? Can I pay my car to get to work? And just hearing you talk about those numbers really brings that into sort of stark focus for me. But sorry, in terms of your question around how I got into finance and perhaps a bit about me and how I deal with money. So I've been in banking and financial services for more than 20 years. And I'll be honest, I certainly didn't go to university with a plan of going into banking. I think at the time I wanted to do some form of architecture, but that wasn't to be, and I ended up going into a graduate scheme at Lloyds Bank. But actually, for somebody who spent a lot of time in retail before going to university, so I worked at an Asda store for years, pulling the fruit and veg and working as a, what do they used to call us? I was a checkout hero when the queues were too long. They would call me and I'd be there to help get those queues down. What I quickly figured out in banking, actually, once you get past the kind of zeros and ones, is it's another service for customers. In fact, it's one of the most important services for customers in the UK. And when they're ready to buy a home, or when they're ready to make one of the biggest purchases that they probably will make in their life, which is a car or a home. And I'll bring it back to the situation we all find ourselves in the moment, that customers are looking for us as Shawbrook Bank, but all banks, to really understand and help them during what is the most uncertain time I'm sure you, Catherine, and certainly myself has ever lived through, and probably ever will live through. And I guess the important thing for all of us is that we try to, help customers. You mentioned your own circumstances with your husband, and try and figure out a way through, whether it's a banking product, a mortgage, or a car loan, or something else. And I guess in terms of Shawbrook working with you and your podcast, we really understand that what you're doing, Catherine, and others, is giving people as much advice as possible, or encouraging them to think openly and honestly about their finances, have a great relationship with their finances, so they're as armed up as they can be when they face a situation like this, whether it's going to lose their job, whether they're going through a period of reduced income, so they can have a good, open, honest conversation about their finances. I did do your test, by the way. I did check my own money personality. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Yeah, we've put together a little fun quiz. I don't know whether any of you guys have had a look at this on the podcast, but yeah, if you go to the moneypanel.co.uk/quiz, we've put together, it's a really super fun quiz. There's like 6 or 7 questions on there. And yeah, Paul messaged me and he's like, myself and my wife did your quiz. And what were the results and what did you gain from doing the quiz, Paul?
Well, first of all, I'm pleased to say that we're still married after I messaged you last week. So clearly, we're a match. But I was a selfless giver, and my wife, I think, was a money planner. Is that right?
Yeah. And did
So
you
I
both
think,
resonate with those?
well, so I definitely am the spender in the house. I'm glad that it showed me that I generally spend on others, although sometimes I think I use that as an excuse for things that I'm buying myself. And my wife, yes, I mean she has a spreadsheet for everything. She knows where every penny has gone. I guess I'm a bit like an interior designer. There's a very famous interior designer on TV. I can't remember his name. Who has got the big hair and the suits on BBC One. I
Oh,
can't remember his name.
Llewellyn, what's his name?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I can't think of his name either now.
Yeah. So apparently his house is just a complete tip because he spends his entire day designing people's houses. And in the evening, I think he just wants to kind of relax with a glass of wine. So my excuse is that my day job is kind of money and helping people out with that. So by the time I get home, I'm kind of done. So that's my excuse anyway. That's what I explained to my wife. But it was a really interesting quiz.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. But it is interesting, isn't it? A lot of people who listen to this podcast and who contact us and have conversations in the community do talk about the fact that just because like you're an accountant, for example, doesn't mean you're good with numbers. Just because you work in a bank doesn't mean you're good with numbers or good with money. And that's what I find really interesting about money. And this is what I love about your campaign we're going to talk about later in the podcast, because it is about understanding things behind the obvious, understanding the numbers, understanding when you make an application for a loan, for example, it's not always the headline number that you get, understanding, for example, the consequences of taking payment holidays and what's underneath that. So, and because of course, who teaches us this stuff? Well, certainly our generation didn't have great education in schools around money. So it's definitely a really interesting conversation to have. And one of the biggest challenges for people right now, Paul, is trying to make decisions around money. What do you see in your world and the work you're doing with Shawbrook Bank? What do you think are some of the biggest challenges for people right now?
I think certainly the challenge for a lot of people in the UK, and again I'll go back to those numbers you were quoting earlier, Catherine, is just either the sheer uncertainty of what's going to happen in the next 4 weeks, 3 months. Um, is my job safe? Am I going to be able to pay my bills? Am I going to get COVID? Am I going to have to self isolate in some way? Will I still get paid if that happens? And I think all of that culminates in that. I'll go back to it, that kind of uncertainty and nervousness around either paying my bills or being able to do my job and getting paid. And what we've seen from the thousands of customers that we've helped is 3 or 4 really separate groups, which is customers that are very clear on their finances and have been immediately impacted by COVID. So somebody in the hospitality sector, in restaurants or in a pub, people working in the travel sector, airports, an air hostess or anybody in the travel industry, those guys, their jobs, their industry effectively just closed down at the start of April. And those guys need immediate help. The second group are people that have taken a reduction in income, so they're working lesser hours or they've been furloughed and they're trying to understand what they can afford to pay out monthly on their bills, and they're contacting us about some form of reduction in payment. So for me, to come back to your question, it's about that uncertainty and then planning financially on how they can pay their bills, their mortgages, their loans, their food, their heating, everything else.
And that's alien to some people, isn't it? Because going back to what you were saying about your and your partner's relationship with money, if you're a planner, a lot of planners will think about all of those different scenarios and maybe pull out, well, if this happens, this is how we'll cope, and if this happens, this is how we'll cope. But for those people who are not so naturally inclined to plan ahead, because human bias is we don't like to plan ahead. We like to enjoy the here and now. We don't have to wait when we want something now. One click of a button on Amazon and it arrives the same day. So often it's very difficult for the mind to think too far ahead. So I think this is a really interesting conversation to start thinking about. Okay, so what are the could ifs, what could happen, and what can we do about that? So, Paul, what would you say if somebody's listening to this and they're struggling to pay their debts? Maybe it's a personal loan repayment, maybe they've been furloughed, or they've suffered some loss of income over recent months. What should they do?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. So I think the first thing they should do, I think you've talked about this before in your podcast, Catherine, is have a really good handle of what their incoming and outgoings are, and have a really good honest relationship of what they can afford and what they can't. I think if they've got that picture, absolutely the next thing they should do is phone their lenders, either if it's for a mortgage or for a loan. The reassurance I'd give your listeners is we as banks and as lenders in the UK completely understand the situation that everybody is going through. And we've been given really good advice by the regulator you mentioned earlier on, the advice of the FCA and the guidance that the FCA has given us to ensure that when you make that call, when you speak to one of the colleagues at Shawbrook Bank or elsewhere, they will completely understand your situation, and they've got a number of tools to help you out. So typically they'll go through what we call an income and expenditure, which is just really validating probably what you've done yourself and understanding what you can and want to pay a month to your mortgage or to your loan. They'll look to arrange that for you so you can pay reduced periods for an agreed period of time. Or if it's for a shorter term, we can offer payment holidays that you've already mentioned. It's worth remembering they're more suited if you've got a real certainty that this is going to be for a short period of time and you're going to be able to go back to making repayments. Payment holidays are perfect for that. They're not so great if you're going to need help over a longer period of time. Really, you need to speak to your lender about some form of reduced payment.
Okay, great. And what impact will that have on somebody's credit rating? Because I know that when payment holidays initially came out, there was a lot of fear, wasn't there, that, oh, well, I can't do that because it's going to affect my credit rating. And then the reassurance was given out that as long as you do it, that it's an arranged agreement, i.e. you don't just cancel your direct debit, then it wouldn't affect your credit rating. But I understand that there are some potential changes to that depending on what you do after that initial payment holiday. What's the impact for people on their credit files, Paul?
Yeah, it's worth remembering the principles of why they set up the not affecting your credit rating when we first introduced payment holidays. And the idea of that was, God willing, COVID is not going to be here forever, and things will get back to normal at some stage. So any support that we give our customers, either in the financial services sector or elsewhere, should be a temporary measure that isn't going to hold you, me, or any of our customers back in any period in the future. So if we wanted to borrow again on a mortgage, or if we wanted to borrow money for a car loan or anything else, home improvements, this period of time where we took out some form of payment deferment or payment holiday doesn't impact that. So that was the principles that the FCA set around not impacting a credit file. As this period is extended probably longer than we expected or hoped, and customers are needing some kind of more longer form support, it's probably more responsible now for that to be registered as part of your credit rating. And the reason for that is that all lenders will make an assessment on you and me when we take out or borrow credit, and we need to make sure that we're lending responsibly and we're lending to ensure that you and I can afford to pay back that loan. So understanding people that are taking longer term payment support is an important part of registering that on the credit reference agency.
Okay, great. And talking of like payment holidays, should people just ask for a payment holiday?
I think, yes, I'd go back to the principles we spoke about earlier on. So I think that if you've sat down and you've had a really good look at your finances, and you understand that you're going to have a period of reduced income, that sounds like it's a scenario where you need a payment holiday, and you should phone your lender and you should talk to them about that. If it's going to be for a longer period of time, again, absolutely call your lender, have a conversation with them, but it might be better to take something more longer term.
So you're kind of deferring that to a
Yeah.
later date. Okay, yeah, that's a great, and I think it's useful to kind of talk about the implications of these decisions and, well, what does that mean? It means maybe you're deferring it for later. And I'm guessing, Paul, can people make overpayments later down the line if they're then in a different financial situation?
Yeah, I mean, they should always check their credit agreements to make sure that they can make overpayments without penalties. And now most mortgages will allow you to pay up to 10% of your balance each year without any penalty, and most loan agreements are the same. So yeah, absolutely, you can catch up and you can pay more off.
Great, great. And Paul, we've heard a lot about kind of so payment holidays and payment deferments, and we've heard in the news recently that, you know, millions of people have taken that option. They've taken those payment holidays on loans and mortgages and credit cards. Is there anything else that people need to be aware of in terms of any impacts on payment holidays other than the things we've already spoken about?
No, I think the three things to remember is if you take them for a longer period of time or take other forms of support from your lenders, that could have an impact on your credit profile. I think the second thing is remember that you could pay more interest, as you mentioned, if you defer any payments on your loan. And then really the final piece is constantly review your finances, make sure that how you set up your borrowing and the arrangements you've made with lenders fit with your income, because that could change again. And when we've seen in this the second wave that we're going through at the moment, that more areas of the UK are being impacted by not necessarily national lockdown, but local lockdown, which is impacting jobs.
And actually, that's a really good point. So what about for people who maybe don't need to take payment holidays or deferments? They're okay, but they're maybe just wanting to have a bit of a trim back on their spending. What can they do?
Well, I think that they should look at what they're spending each month. They should look at typically what they're paying out to their utility bills, to their car insurance if they drive, other bills associated with their home. We've seen insurance, particularly car insurance, drop significantly over the last 6 months as car insurance companies realise people are on the road
Nobody's
less,
driving.
nobody's driving. They offered that refund to people 3 months ago. It wasn't a large sum of money, but it was a refund that people should take advantage of if your listeners haven't already. So really just having a review of what they're paying out to and making sure they've got the best deals. There's plenty of comparison sites out there available. I'm sure that you refer your listeners to, and there's lots of deals to be had actually at the moment, particularly on energy as well.
Mm. Yeah, which is an interesting one, isn't it? Even my husband said to me this morning, I said, "Can you put the heating on?" He was like, "No, just put some more jumpers on." And I was like, "No, I work from home every day now. I'm going to have the heating on." But
I
it's
am also working from home, and we are having that same battle. I don't know if the money planner and the selfless giver have a different view of what's warm or not, but
yes.
um, yeah, so I'm having the same challenge.
Oh, like, yeah, I mean, he's working from home this afternoon, actually. So I'm sure he'll be very appreciative of the fact that I have had the heating on all day and it's nice and toasty in the house now. And you guys have got some pretty cool resources on your website in terms of some budgeting tools. And are there some good sort of resources there, Paul, for people to have a look at?
We're really, as a lender, trying to give our customers as many tools as we can for them to really have a good understanding of their finances. So one of the principles that we've always had at Shawbrook Bank is we want our customers to understand any products they take with us, be it a savings product or a lending product. So our personal loans would be a good example in this case, to understand the cost of that loan upfront, and understand therefore whether they can afford it, whether they can budget for it, and if it's the right thing for them to do. Because even in this pandemic we're at the moment, somebody will need a new car, somebody may need a loan for that, and now more than ever, if we're providing those services, a bit like as I spoke to you earlier on about, we want to make sure that customers are making really informed decisions about their borrowing and making sure it's the right thing for them.
Great. So tell us a little bit more about your MoneySure campaign.
The MoneySure campaign is based on those principles of customers understanding what they can afford, when they can afford it. On our website, we've given them tools to really understand their monthly budgets, whether they're saving enough money, whether they've got a buffer. We talked earlier on about uncertainty. Really, your listeners should be looking to have a buffer of at least 3 months of their monthly salary. I know that sounds like an incredible amount of money, and it would be difficult for anybody to save that, but working towards having that some kind of buffer can help. So it's really all of those tools to give our potential customers, or even people that aren't customers with Shawbrook today, the ability to make informed decision about their savings and their borrowing.
Yeah, that's great. I was actually looking at the website myself last week because I applied for the bounce back loan during lockdown, and it's sitting in one of my pots at the moment. And one of the questions from my audience was, where are people keeping their money? And I was like, oh, actually, do you know what? It's been on my list to do, because, I'm so busy looking after everybody else's finances. Sometimes you don't have time to look after yourselves. And I was actually having a look at your site because you offer some pretty good rates as well on business accounts. So that's certainly somewhere I'm looking to store my bounce back loan for the time being. But I love the MoneySure campaign because it really does help people to understand what's available to them. So make sure you guys go and check that out. We'll pop a link in the show notes. But if you go over to the website, which is shawbrook.co.uk/MoneySure, there's loads of helpful guides and links in there. And lastly, Paul, if people are really seriously worried about money, and things like reviewing their spending isn't enough, and they really need some additional support way beyond perhaps having conversations with their mortgage companies and payment holidays, etc., where would be a good place for them to get additional supports?
Sure. And first off, the thing I would say is that if you are in that situation, you're definitely not alone, and you shouldn't feel isolated. Particularly at the moment, there are a lot of people that are going through severe uncertainty about their income, and how they're going to afford to pay their bills. The two services that we recommend is Step Change, and the National Debt Line. They're really well equipped to help customers in the circumstances that you just described. I would definitely recommend your listeners to talk to either one of those agencies if they're having problems. And remember that they're certainly not alone in getting through this situation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Paul. And I know that Step Change, you don't even need to call them. Like, they have a questionnaire you can fill in on their website. You can do it in the middle of the night. If you're up in the middle of the night worrying about money, which I know is the time often when people start to worry about money, then they do offer ways to get that support without you necessarily having to pick up the phone, because that can be a real challenge for people, because often if you're in that situation, we bury our heads in the sand. It's a natural human reaction to just go into fight or flight mode.
Yeah.
And that's where I guess, just to share an additional tip for me in this topic of conversation is, our mental health and how you feel is as important as anything else. And that's why I love the campaign that you guys are doing as well around MoneySure, because it's the practical steps, but it's also understanding that you're not alone and there is support available out there. And I often find that sometimes when we're in that fight or flight scenario, having some kind of like gratitude diary or something like that can just be really supportive of how you're feeling about money. Because often when we don't talk about something because it's still quite taboo, then it just makes you feel even worse. So reaching out to people is really important, and being around people in a similar situation. This is why we talk about these kind of subjects on the podcast, because feeling positive with your money and your mental health is as important as the practical steps. So I just wanted to kind of throw that little one in the end, in terms of supports. But also as well, if you're in a situation of money maybe is a little bit tighter than normal, think outside the box a little bit. I mean, sometimes people come up with these amazing ideas in our community about, oh, do you know what? Actually, I'm really good at video editing, or I can create banners on social media accounts, or all these different skills that they have. There's some great websites like fiverr.com and Upwork, Well, you can just go on and list your services and get a little bit of extra money in. This is what we talk about when we talk about, it's not just about reducing your spending, but sometimes it can be about other ways to generate income. And we've seen businesses completely pivot during lockdown. One of my clients, she provides like products to help with keeping like grass like growing beautifully and really nice. And she's got all the equipment available to support the period when everyone was trying to get hold of, antiseptic sprays and all sorts of things. So she completely pivoted her business. So sometimes it is about thinking about other alternatives and other solutions.
I'd agree with that. The government expects as well, I think, more new small businesses in the next 2 years than there has been in the last 10. You have to watch me on that quote, but I'm sure that's the numbers that they're expecting, because people will sadly move out of their job, or some people will lose their job over this period of time. And it's that point of inflection and reflection where you have got an opportunity to perhaps do something different, and look at how you want to make money going forward. And more so now with, as you mentioned, with online tools, starting up a business is not as difficult as it was. It's certainly a very difficult challenge, but not as difficult as it was even 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah, 100%. Like the emergence of the online entrepreneur has been astronomical in the last few years, because it is so much easier to engage with people to buy your services or your products. I guess that's the benefit of social media. Although having watched the recent Netflix documentary, what's it called? The Social Dilemma, is it, or something? I don't know whether you've seen it, Paul.
I've not, no.
Oh, it's like it kind of throws everything into the air about the downsides of social media. But that's one of the challenges, isn't it? Is that sometimes people will see other people online and start comparing themselves to everybody else and comparing their life. And, it's really just focusing in your lane and putting your blinkers on, and whatever you need to do right now, and knowing that there is additional support available out there. So thank you so much, Paul. It's been really interesting to get to know more about your MoneySure campaign, and also, just to talk through some practical tips as to what people can do if they find themselves in that situation. So thank you so much for your time, Paul.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much for listening, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please do me a big favor and leave me a comment below this video and let me know, what was your one biggest takeaway? What are you going to do differently as a result of watching today's video? Now, you can go ahead and check out more free resources available to you at the website, which is themoneypanel.co.uk, or please feel free to tune into our weekly podcast on all of the typical podcast channels. That's In Her Financial Shoes. And remember, small steps, big wins. Let's go.